Welcome to Forum 360. I'm your host, Leah Love, where we have a global outlook from a local view. Today, I am so excited that we are going to talk about a very serious subject, but I think a very much needed subject. So we have our guest with us, Mrs. Helen Ray, and she is going to talk about navigating life after loss. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
So you are the owner of Journey Beyond Walls. Tell me what that is.
Journey Beyond Walls is actually a coaching program for those who want to get past any obstacles that they're facing, anything in life that would cause them to not pursue their goals or that they're struggling with on a daily basis, in order for them to feel free to be exactly who they are and achieve their dreams and visions and also get the relief. They want to grab the joy in life and the purpose that they feel in their hearts and be empowered to do that.
You know, and I think it's important to note that loss isn't just a person.
Right.
It can be a multitude of things.
Exactly.
Well, great. So what is grief and how does it affect people differently?
Grief, oftentimes we think about grief as being the emotion, you know, the crying, the sadness and whatnot. But actually grief is simply the conflicting emotions that are a response to a change in routine, a change in behavior, or an end of behavior that we're used to. And so many things can trigger grief, not just death or the death of a loved one, but any number of things. Things like moving that you don't often think of as triggering grief. Perhaps it's going from single to married, or perhaps it's the end of a relationship. All of those things can actually trigger grief. But there are over 40 events in life that can trigger grief.
Okay. So here's a question that people think. Grief should have a certain time frame, right? How long does grief really last? You should be over that by now, right? That's what we hear all the time.
Right, oftentimes that's what people say. But there is no time frame because it's about relationship, whether it's relationship with an individual or relationship with a circumstance. So when things end or when things change, it triggers an emotional response. So it's not like you're going to be over it in 3 days. You may not be over it in 3 months because every relationship is unique for every person. So there's no time frame. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to think there is, so they want to hurry up and get through it. Mm-hmm. But that's not what it is, because grief is about being brokenhearted. It's not an intellectual process.
So how do you heal the broken heart?
That's good. That's a good question. It involves a process. Now, many times people don't want to talk about processes because that means they have to do something and they have to face something. But the only way to really heal from grief is to go through a process, what I call grief recovery, because I am, a certified grief recovery method specialist. But there's a series of small, specific steps that the person who's grieving can take in order to help heal their heart and say goodbye to the pain of the situation. Not necessarily to the person if a person is involved, but to the pain of the situation, so that then they can move beyond the pain and reclaim their life and be able to move forward.
I love that. So you mentioned the grief recovery method. Can you explain that a little bit more in detail?
Yes, actually it is, it's a process, but it's an evidence-based process that proves that if you take these certain steps, that it allows the person in a healthy manner to process the grief that they're going through. As a matter of fact, Kent State University is the school that did the research on this and continues to research it. So that with that process, it continues to evolve as we gain more information, more data, so that we can serve people at their best and really help them to get beyond grief.
What do you think has been most interesting for you to learn through this whole process of evolving through the grief process and recovery method?
Well, one of the things I've learned is that there are no stages of grief, which is a very, very common belief, but it's a myth. Dr. Kubler-Ross, who first came up with that, was applying it to those patients who had been given a terminal illness and were definitely facing the end of that illness. Unfortunately, society grabbed hold of that and then tried to apply it to people experiencing grief. And Dr. Kubler-Ross said, no, that's a misapplication. The thing about it is, when people believe there are stages and they think that there are certain things they should be doing at certain stages and they find that they're not able to, they feel like they're stuck and that grief will never end for them. And that is a misnomer.
I have always heard that there's different stages. So that's interesting that there are not stages to it.
No. Now, there are different patterns to grief because grief tends to ebb and flow at different times, but there are no stages.
All right, you guys, there are no stages. There's no time limits. So we're breaking all of those rules that we have been taught. All right, so let's say I want to support my loved one who is grieving, but I don't want to be overbearing. I don't want to be not sensitive to what they need. So what is it that I can do to help support them?
Well, one of the biggest things you can do is simply ask them, how can I support you? Secondly is give them an opportunity to talk. You might want to go and just sit in silence. You be silent. If they're silent, fine. Be comfortable in the silence, not uncomfortable. But at the same time, if they decide they want to talk about their loss, allow them the freedom to express their emotion. And their emotions may come out in various ways. As they're talking about their loss, they may start out very calm. They may end up being angry. They may end up being very sad. But allow all of those emotions to come to the forefront. And then ask them in what practical ways that you can help. Because people oftentimes think, well, you know, I've got to rush, I've got to make this casserole and I've got to rush over there and I've got to give it to them. And I don't want, you know, them to be sad, so I'm not going to talk about it or talk about the person if it's in case of a death. But allow them the freedom to express themselves in their grief however they choose to, because grief is unique to every person. The events may be similar, but it's unique. And so the best thing that you can do, first of all, just allow them to express their emotions. And then don't assume anything, because they're going through a lot.
Yeah, and in going through a lot, let's say this person has children. People often wonder, do children also experience grief? Or how do you talk to them about experiencing losses? You know, how can they begin those difficult conversations with them?
Well, children definitely experience grief. It looks different in children than it does in adults. I know when I was very young, the common myth was that children don't experience grief, that they're, you know, not affected by it, but that's not true. The thing is, they'll take their cues from the adults around them. If they find that the adults are not talking about it, they won't talk about it, which means those emotions are trapped in them. And with the emotions comes a lot of energy. They don't have the tools to be able to express it in ways. So it may come out like behavioral problems, or children may isolate, or they may be very, very, very sad and not be able to articulate exactly what's going on. So one of the things adults can do is to spend time with that child. Let that child know it's okay to not only express those emotions, but take the time to share your emotions with that child. For instance, let's say a grandparent has passed away, and it may be your immediate parent. And you can tell your son, your daughter, you know, I'm really sad about Grammy dying. And sometimes I feel a little angry because I wanted her to stay longer, but she didn't. Mm-hmm. And it can be a little confusing. And allow that child then to express their emotions, because they may feel anger, confusion, any number of things, frustration, especially if they don't understand why this had to happen at this particular time. Mm-hmm. And so it's important that we open those lines of communication and never, ever make the child feel that they can't express their emotions or that they're not in a safe environment to do so. Because just as with adults who have all these different emotions going on inside, children do too. And they need the opportunity to do that. When I was very young, about the age of maybe 6 or 7, I had a brother who took sick very suddenly. And the way our parents had us, we were almost in twos. So he was very close to me. When he took sick, I mean, it happened so swiftly. Within 2 days, he was gone. After that, everyone else was kind of swept up in their own grief. So no one talked to me. It wasn't because they were being neglectful. They were just involved in grief themselves. So I never spoke to anyone about my grief. But I felt it because he and I were the closest of the siblings. And he passed away the day before his 5th birthday. So as the years went on, never having grieved his death, it would come up at odd times as an adult. And I would find myself at my desk at work, and a passing thought would cross my mind about Maurice. And all of a sudden, I would feel all this emotion well up. Tears in the eyes and all of that. And I would say, you know, this is not the time. This is not the time, and push those emotions down. Well, as the years went by, that energy just gained strength until it finally reached a point where I knew I had to do something about it, or else I would be losing control totally. Mm-hmm. And that's when I discovered grief recovery, because other things I'd tried didn't work. And so it's important that children do not carry those things, that unresolved grief, up into adulthood, because it's going to give them problems as children most often, if not behavioral problems, emotional problems, because they haven't had an opportunity to process it.
And if you are just tuning in, we are talking to Mrs. Helen Ray about navigating life after loss. Now, you mentioned having tools or children not having tools. Mm-hmm. So what are some coping mechanisms, healthy coping mechanisms, and what are some toxic ones that people can identify that this is a signal that I need to get help? But can you speak to both of those?
Sure. When it comes, especially with children, when it comes to healthy coping mechanisms, allow them to talk about the person or the situation, how they feel about it, without feeling like they have to limit what they have to say. Also, allow them to honor the person who passed away, or if they had a relationship that was kind of complex with that person, allow them to express those things that were not so positive as well. Because one of the things oftentimes we do is we either deify the person who passed away or we demonize the person who passed away. And neither one of those is really accurate, because that child's going to form those memory pictures So allow them to express it. That means if they need to write a letter to express things that they wish they had said or done differently, help them to do that. If they're too young to write a letter, then talk them through the process so that they will then be able to come to what we call completion. In other words, that their feelings have been heard because they were able to say them, and that it's okay. Now, one of the worst things we can do is when someone suffers a loss, is to tell them, oh, don't be sad. You can get another dog. Don't be sad. You can get another spouse. Don't be sad. You can have more children. That is some of the worst that you can tell a person, because basically it negates what they're feeling. It causes them to say, well, I had feelings about this, but I can't trust my feelings. And that spills over into other areas of their life. And also it lets them know the relationship they had with whatever is suddenly invalid. And that's not true. That's not honest. Even in terms of, say, a person who has lost a pet. Because losing a pet can be devastating to people. Just to replace it with another pet, without taking time to grieve that pet that they loved so much and it was part of their life, it'll be difficult for them to actually connect with the new pet. And so there will always be that void because they had not completed the relationship with the original. So we need to be very aware of the things that we say and even the things that we promote. For instance, if we say, well, if you had kept this job, because job loss is another loss. If you had continued to work in this job and it never, went by the wayside, you would be far happier. Well, maybe the loss of that job was due to something that they didn't do, had any control over. So then that person feels guilty and begins to question themselves, criticize themselves, analyze themselves. And that's not fair because there's so many things that are out of our control. And we do have 4 commitments when we go through the process of starting to process loss. And the first one is to be absolutely honest about what took place and what you feel emotionally. What are you feeling about this? Because you can't really confront it unless you're honest with yourself. Secondly, not to judge, analyze, or criticize. Not other people, nor yourself. We can be our own worst enemy, right? The third one is to just take the time. Take the time to allow yourself to express whatever emotion it is. And the last one is usually when we're in a setting where we're meeting, and that's just to turn off the electronics or mute them so that they can be fully present in the process. And so it's important that people understand that grief is not a quick fix. It is also not a dysfunction, but it is the genuine human emotions that we use to respond to any kind of loss. Far beyond death, there are many, many losses that we deal with.
What if you have a friend and you feel like they should seek some type of counseling, grief recovery? How do you begin that conversation that would be in a helpful manner?
I would suggest asking them how they feel and sit and wait for an answer. Even talk to them about their loss You know, I know you've been, you know, working with or struggling with this particular loss. And I know it's impacting your life. And I also know you want to be able to continue to enjoy life in the future. We've got people who can support you in that. Mm-hmm. Would you like to see someone who can support you, a grief counselor or a grief recovery coach? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, if they say yes, then fine. You know, connect them with someone. If they say no, just allow them to express themselves and see how they feel about that. Because sometimes it's guilt that they think they don't deserve to move on.
So let's say they say no, and you know they're just not ready for that stage yet. Mm-hmm. Are there any other resources that maybe you could provide that they would be like, well, you know what, why don't you try this, you know, until you're ready?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One, there is the Grief Recovery Handbook.
Okay.
They can read on their own.
Okay.
That's fine too. Usually we recommend that they go through it with a facilitator, mm-hmm. but sometimes people just aren't ready to sit with another human being where that's concerned. Mm-hmm. The other thing you can do is simply walk with them through life as they go through this. You know, still allow them time to speak about it and let them know that you support them in their grief, mm-hmm. whatever the cause is, because there are some people who don't feel supported if, say, the person they're grieving may be an ex, mm-hmm. or it may be someone with whom they had a troublesome relationship, and they may not feel like people will understand why they're grieving that person's exit from their life. Yeah. Let them know that you support them, because it's not about the other person. Mm-hmm. It's about them and the love and the care that you have for them.
So reassurance is the main thing.
Absolutely.
So we talked about a little bit about your identity and your purpose. And let's say grief changes that in somebody. How do they begin to re-navigate those waters?
That's a good question, because people can sometimes become very bitter after experiencing a loss. The best thing you can do in that case is to help them see some of the positives. Even if it's a relationship that has become difficult before the grief event happened, help them to recall some of the good times, some of the good moments, and encourage them to write in a journal, perhaps, to record those kinds of things, so that they can then take a look at that in some of their lowest moments and realize, okay, there was some good there. Mm-hmm. And I am a good person, mm-hmm. you know. Mm-hmm. Because the hardest thing to do sometimes, when you're caught up in the depths of grief, the sadness, the self-analysis, is to understand that there were some high points. There were some good things. Even in difficult grief, because there is like anticipatory grief, where you have a loved one who maybe has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Yeah. And so you know, okay, the doctor's saying they only have 3 months, 6 months. Mm-hmm. And you begin to find yourself grieving the loss of that person, the future that you thought you would have with that person that will never come to be. But they can begin to enjoy the moments that are left, to focus on the positive, to even recall or begin a memory book, to recall the good times that they had together, even to record some positive messages or heartfelt messages about how they feel about the person and the things that they, experience with them in life. So that helps them to kind of turn the corner oftentimes until they can get into some type of grief recovery program.
That is one thing I wish I would have done with my dad. Just recorded more things, but in my mind, I had so much more time, you know?
Sure.
And you just don't know how much time you have with people, you know?
No.
It could be a loss, that's an illness, it could be a car crash, you know?
Right.
Something that's sudden. So that is definitely something that I wish I would have stopped to do and taken that time. In our final quick moments, do you have anything you would like to leave them with about healing, recovery? Just a quick little...
Yes. That no matter how hard or how deep the grief is, there is joy on the other side of it.
Love it. Well, thank you all for joining us today, where we have a global outlook from a local view. I am your host, Leah Love, and I hope you all have a great and peaceful journey navigating life after loss. Thank you.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.